Perfectionism isn't about doing things well. It's about feeling like nothing you do is ever enough. There's a difference between wanting to do something well and feeling like you have to be perfect to be accepted. And without even realizing it, that disconnects you from yourself. And today we're going to talk about perfectionism, why it's not actually helping you grow, and how it might be the very thing keeping you stuck. And for me, this is something that started very early on. Growing up as a preacher's daughter, there was this expectation that we had to be perfect. And it wasn't unspoken. It was very much spoken, drilled into us, like we were living in a glass house, always being watched. For a time before my dad had a church building, we held services in the back room of our farmhouse. There were pews, a pulpit, and a cot set off to the side. And if we fidgeted or did something my father could see from the pulpit, we were called out and made to come sit there for the rest of the service. And in our home, my dad held what he called kangaroo court. He would gather my mom, my sisters, and me and lay down the law, sometimes even standing at the pulpit while he did it. There was also a routine of punishment, and in our home, there was a difference. Most of what we experienced growing up were not spankings. They were beatings, delivered with force, with intensity. But in these moments, these were what I refer to as spankings. And you learn the difference. They didn't carry the same level of force, but they were still meant to hurt. And they served a purpose, to keep us in line, to make sure we stayed in line. My dad would say, "This is to make sure you stay good." So in my childhood, there was very little room for mistakes, very little room to just be human. And the message was clear. Any mistakes we made wasn't just ours. It reflected on my father, on our family. It was a narrative my mother repeated to us over and over. In my youth, I not only knew to toe the line, but to judge myself within these boundaries and rules. And in the environment I was raised in, there was a clear hierarchy. Men held the authority, and women were expected to be quiet. Similar to children, they were to be seen but not heard, to be proper, to be put together. So there was this pressure to be perfect, to not make mistakes. And because it was so deeply ingrained in me, I carried that into most of my life. I held myself to an incredibly high standard because the environment I was raised in was very critical, very judgmental. And when you're holding yourself to that level of perfection, you can start to expect it from others too. And this didn't just show up in how I thought. It showed up in everything, in how I looked, in how I showed up in life, in how I was perceived. But as I began to do my own healing around perfectionism, something started to shift. When I would see people make mistakes or show what we're taught to see as flaws, I felt relief. Not because they were doing something wrong, but because it grounded me. It reminded me what it looks like to just be human. And I found comfort in that, in people being real, in people being imperfect. And this is where we have to look at what perfectionism actually is. There is so much emphasis on being perfect in our appearance, in how we behave. And this isn't just something we experienced growing up. It's reinforced everywhere. Through media, through trends, through Hollywood, through loud voices and opinions, and what is broadcast to us every day. Through what we're told we should look like and how we should present ourselves. And the message is subtle, but constant. If you don't look this way, if you don't fit this standard, you're not enough. Too tall, too skinny, too overweight, not the right skin, not the right look, too young, or not young enough. And it becomes this cycle telling us who we should be, how we should look, what we should change. And it becomes so normalized, like the ands and the thes in our language, something we don't even think about anymore. We just do it, we adjust, we compare. We try to meet the standard without ever stopping to question it. And that's what makes it so harmful, because it doesn't feel like pressure anymore. It just feels normal. And the truth is, it's a race you'll never reach the finish line in, because the standard is always changing. And that's why authenticity matters, because instead of chasing what the world tells you is perfect, your reference point becomes what is true for you. And that's how you begin to step out of that cycle. And for a long time, perfectionism can look like discipline, like standard, like doing things well. But beneath that, perfectionism isn't about doing things well. It's fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being judged, of being rejected, of being left behind. Fear if we don't get it right, someone else will. This someone will outshine us, outperform us, be chosen over us, that will be overlooked, passed by. And so we try to control it by getting everything right, by saying things the right way, by showing up a certain way. Because somewhere along the line, we learned that being perfect means being accepted. And anything less than that meant we were not enough. Chasing perfection is exhausting, because it's like trying to outrun something you were never meant to outrun, like trying to outrun age. And there are things in life that are certain. We are born, we age, and one day we pass on. And no matter how much we try to control it, we cannot perfect our way out of being human. Before we go any further, I want to take a moment here, because if something in this conversation is speaking to you and you're feeling the pull to go deeper, I've created spaces for you to do that. Through my work inside the Return to Self Academy, which is the home of all my courses and deeper work, and inside my Self-Love Bootcamp, these are spaces where we begin to reconnect with ourselves, to come back to who we are beneath the conditioning, beneath the noise, to learn how to build a relationship with ourselves that feels grounded, honest, and supportive. Because so much of what I share here is just the beginning of that journey. Inside my Self-Love Bootcamp Masterclass, we go deeper into that work, into reframing the way you see yourself, learning how to meet yourself with compassion, and beginning to shift the patterns that keep you disconnected from who you are. Also inside the Academy, I offer a free foundational class, Unlearning Shame and Guilt, which is a starting place to begin understanding where those patterns come from and to start releasing them. And if you found your way here through my book, Uprooting Shame and Guilt, that is another space that supports this work, helping you understand where shame begins, how it shapes you, and how to begin releasing it so you can return to yourself more fully. This work is about learning to see life differently, to reconnect with yourself, to soften into something more whole, more grounded, and more real. And if this space speaks to you, you can also explore all that through the show notes below. And now, let's come back to this conversation. And this is where it starts to show up in our lives, not just in how we think, but in what we do and what we don't do. Like, let's say you want to apply for that job, the one that would actually fulfill you. And instead you give yourself 100 reasons why you can't, why you're not ready, why you're not good enough, why you're not perfect enough. So you step back, you take up less space, you don't even try, because you've already convinced yourself why you shouldn't. And even with something like being on camera, as I created my first course, this felt like a huge undertaking for me. I'm not someone who stands in the mirror or takes selfies, so this brought up everything. I would think about it, immediately go into, how do I look on camera? How do I come across? Do I need to change something about myself first? I remember thinking, maybe I should fix my bottom teeth. Maybe I should lose weight. My pronunciation isn't always on point. Sometimes I get tongue-tied. All these conditionings before I would allow myself to be seen. And at some point, I just let that go. I thought, what if I show up just as I am? And I did. I decided this is who I am, and my heart has something to share. And I wasn't going to let that list hold me back anymore. But even now, it still shows up in small ways. I'll be editing a video, watching myself back and thinking, wow, that's a lot of facial expression. And I know I'm expressive. My daughter and I are the same. Our faces show everything. There's no hiding it. And when that voice comes in, telling me something isn't perfect, I feel a resistance to that voice and say aloud, so what? I'm not perfect. Who cares? I'm human. And it brings me back to myself. So you see, this is what perfection does. It gives us a list of everything that has to be fixed before we begin. And so we wait for the perfect time, the perfect amount of money, the perfect situation to buy the home, to have the baby, to get married. And even without realizing it, we stay exactly where we are. Because if we're waiting for perfect, we will be waiting forever. Because the truth is, we each have our own version of what perfect is. And that is where it becomes an illusion. Because there is no such thing as perfect. Even the most successful people, the ones we look at and think they have it all, they have their own lists. We just don't see it. So when we begin to understand that, our vision doesn't have to be shaped by what we're told is acceptable or what we're told is perfect. We can come back to ourselves, to stop competing with the world and start meeting ourselves where we are. And when we give ourselves permission to be human, to show up authentically and unapologetically as we are, we release the pressure to be anything other than ourselves. And this creates space for us to soften. And with this, let's look at the soul musing for reflection. When we meet imperfection with compassion, we give ourselves permission to simply be. The need to be perfect loses its edge. And in that softening, we remember we belong, we are home. And from here, I'll leave you with a few questions to reflect on. Where in my life am I holding myself to a standard of perfection that leaves no room for me to be human? What am I waiting to fix or change about myself before I allow myself to fully show up? Where has perfectionism been keeping me stuck instead of moving forward? And what would it look like to show up as I am without needing to get it right first? If this space speaks to you, you're welcome to subscribe and follow along for future conversations. And if you'd like to go deeper, another video that relates to today's conversation is why shame stays with you. Because I truly believe that when we begin to heal ourselves, we create more compassion, more understanding, and ultimately a better world for everyone. With much love, I'll see you in the next video.